BigCountryPreps.com. I'm Evan Wren, and this is the Countdown to Two-A-Days series, our daily look at an area football team and the key questions that we're going to be answering about that team in our preseason football preview on August 21st here at Big Country Preps with my partner, Dan Youngblood, via Zoom. And tonight, Dan, we are talking about the Jim Ned Indians.
Yep, and the 2024 Jim Ned Indians are one of many teams throughout the area this year that will have a new head coach, and one of several that will have a coach who's a former member of their staff, and Jonathan McClure, who has taken over the program. What's been a very successful program. Coach Fanning, his predecessor, did a great job there, and he leaves them with a pretty good foundation to build off of. They got 21 of their 33 lettermen back from last year's 8-3 team, including 5 offensive and 7 defensive starters. So you'd expect Jim Ned to kind of continue the level of success we've seen from him in recent years. But it's going to be a fun year. You're obviously, anytime you have a new coach and 6 offensive starters to replace, you're going to have some questions to answer. We'll talk about a few of those here in a little bit, but just on paper, I would expect Jim Ned to be very competitive again in 2024.
Before we get going, we need to remind you YouTubers to please hit the subscribe button and also hit the little bell so you'll get notifications each and every time Big Country Preps comes up with a new video. And also, we'd like to thank a couple of our sponsors, beginning with For the Love of the Game Broadcasting and our old friend Terry Slavens, owner of KLAX 93.5 FM out of Breckenridge, 97.7 FM KATX out of Eastland, Classic Country AM 1330 out of Graham, 94.7 FM KWKQ out of Graham, KROO 1430 AM out of Breck, and KWBY 98.5 FM out of Ranger. That is For the Love of the Game Broadcasting. Also, Rob Durham, sales consultant at Bear Chevrolet Buick Cadillac up in Breckenridge. If you're in the market for a vehicle, give Rob a shout at 254-559-2266. He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever want to meet. That is Rob Durham up at Bear Chevrolet Buick Cadillac in Breckenridge.
All right, and with that, let's jump in. Let's talk about these Jim Ned Indians and some of the biggest questions that will be facing them this season. Right off the bat, I think one that's going to be interesting is going to be to see who emerges as some of their offensive playmakers this year. I think they've got some kids who have that opportunity to be really impact players offensively, but they've got a lot of guys who haven't necessarily done it at the varsity level. One thing that I think is going to be interesting is that quarterback position, where they lost Gray Beasley as a junior last year really early in the season. Dean Guffey took over and did an admirable job. You've got both those guys back, so you expect to be pretty strong at the quarterback position. One thing that's going to be interesting, I think, is going to be at the running back position, where you lose a really good player in Braden Shipman, a kid who was an impact back. You're going to have to find a way to replace him. And I think it'll be maybe more of a committee style than what they've had in recent years, where they've had that feature type guy. But they've got a couple of good guys. I mean, you've got Aiden Ellis, who ran for over 450 yards last year. You've got Trey Hicks, who ran for over 330. So 2 kids who have toted the rock a little bit and done a good job. So I think you're going to be able to run the ball a little bit. And then the big question probably from that skill position standpoint is who's going to be catching the football. They do not have a whole lot back in terms of established receiving talent. I think their leading receiver is tight end Mason Miller, who had 6 catches for 87 yards last year. So they're going to have to find some guys to catch the ball if they hope to maintain that balance. But it's going to be fun to watch and see how that plays out. I think that's going to be one of the big questions going into this season.
Question I would have for Jim Ned kind of ties in with what you were just talking about. Now they have to develop some skilled personnel. They're learning a new system under Coach Jonathan McClure in his first year there. So while they're putting their things together, one thing that would cure a lot of ills early on is that they can get a push up front. If that, I mean that solves a lot of problems. It buys you time, while you're trying to find the right combinations and find guys that can catch the football, that sort of thing. They're not as big as they have been, but they're not small. Jim Ned's still not small. They go about 225, a lot of 225 pounders across the board. Where in the past, we've seen Jim Ned with these offensive lines that, man, we've seen guys 270 up to 300 sometimes. But they're still big, but they're not as big as they have been. If they can get that push up front, I think we're going to see the old Jim Ned sooner or later, because I mean the skill will be there once they develop it.
And last question we'll talk about here is on the other side of the football. And I think this is going to be potentially a major strength of this Jim Ned team, where they've got 7 starters back on that defensive side of the football. And that's been a strength of them. They've been a physical, defensive-minded program for the last several years. And I think my big question is can that defense be as good as they're hoping it can be, particularly early in the season as they kind of get as that offense kind of finds its footing with some of those young players establishing themselves as those playmakers. So I'm excited to see how good this defense can be. I think they're excited about the possibilities. I think they think it can be a major strength, and you'd expect it to with just four starters being replaced. So I'm excited to see what they can do on that side of the football and see if they can continue that identity that we've seen from Jim Ned in recent years.
All right, with that, we're going to take a look at Jim Ned's schedule for 2024, and we'll start with the non-district portion of it. And Dan, there's no cupcakes in this. There's no cupcakes.
Mhm.
Coach McClure's got a really tough schedule in front of him. They open at Lubbock Estacado, a Class 4A team, on the road on August 30th, and that's not a bad 4A team either in Estacado. They've got Lubbock Trinity Christian, a difficult private school coming in on September 6th. They're at Wall, and we know how tough Wall is. That's going to be on September 13th. That's a road game. And then they've got consecutive home dates with Jacksboro on September the 20th and Holiday on the 27th. That's two teams out of District 6 that are very good. So there's not a single cupcake in the group for Jim Ned. They will be ready for district. That'll be a battle-hardened group.
Yeah, and really that open date on October 4th is their only break before district. That is a really tough non-district schedule. And then things don't get a whole lot easier once you start district play. They open at Comanche on October 11th before hosting Breckenridge on the 18th of October. They follow that at San Angelo TLCA on the 25th of October before hosting Clyde on November 1st and finishing up their regular season schedule at Sweetwater on November 8th. So, like we've been talking about with all the teams in this district, a tough schedule from top to bottom and one that's going to be a whole lot of fun to watch. I think this is, as I've said in previous videos pertaining to this district, I think this is going to be one of the more fun leagues that we have in our area this year. And I think Jim Ned's going to be right in the thick of it. It's going to be a really exciting season for the Indians.
Right now, we've been picking what we think is the game of the year for each team. That game that is probably you circle on your calendar. That's probably the most important ball game of the season for that team. I'll let you go first with Jim Ned.
Yeah, I'm struggling with this district. I look at that schedule and I could see four you could pick. I think I'll go with that November 1st game at home against Clyde. I think that has the potential to be a really big game in this district. And if Jim Ned can win that one, that makes a really interesting game at Sweetwater the final week of the regular season. So this could come. I think there's a good chance this race does come down to the final week of the regular season, and I think both those games are going to be a lot of fun to watch.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say both those last two games, hosting Clyde on the 1st of November, and then at Sweetwater on the 8th. I think Jim Ned will go into that two-game stretch right there in position to maybe win a district championship, maybe if they sweep it. And so it's kind of hard to. I mean, you can say Clyde's the most important, but if they win that, guess what? The next one's going to be, even more important, possibly for the district title. So I just see those two games there. I think Jim Ned will arrive at that point with an opportunity if they sweep it to win the district championship.
Mhm.
So it's kind of hard to separate the two for me,
Yeah.
but I think those last two games are going to be very exciting for the Indians.
Yeah, but of all the districts we've talked about so far on our Countdown to Two Days series, I think this may be the toughest. This is the toughest challenge in picking games of the year because there's so many games that could be. I mean, we mentioned Clyde and Sweetwater. Those Comanche and Breckenridge games could be could be really tough too. So
I was just
it's
going to say, I
throw
was just going
darts
to
at the
say,
board.
I was just going to say, if I'm Jim Ned, you know what? The one game that really worries me if I'm coaching Jim Ned is that opener, that district opener at Comanche,
Yeah,
and I mean, that's not going to be easy and it's going to be on grass. So, I
yeah,
mean, you got to go out there and play them on their turf, on that grass and win that one just to set up the rest of the district stretch. And if you lose that ball game, you're kind of playing from behind the
yeah,
rest of the way and your margin for error drops. So it just depends if they lose that ball game, do their goals change after
yeah.
that?
I don't
It's
know.
you don't know what becomes available after that because that's your margin for error drops greatly if you drop
Yeah.
that game against Comanche, and there are no guarantees out there. Telling
No,
you.
but I think their district schedule plays out interestingly because you've got two gritty potentially, I mean, teams that are going to punch you in the mouth in Comanche and Breckenridge right off the bat. And those aren't necessarily the games that people point at as being, the ones that are going to be most important on their schedule, but those are dangerous games there. And then you got two kind of high flying explosive teams at the end in Clyde and Sweetwater. So it's going to be a fun schedule.
One thing is for sure though, that brutal non-district schedule will have Jim Ned ready, mentally at least,
Yeah.
when they go out there to Comanche for that opener. Um, they'll be ready mentally and physically. They will be battle hardened. So
Yeah.
we shall
And
see. It's going to be a fun league.
it will be.
That's going to be a fun district to watch right
Yeah.
there.
And the young kids will grow up quickly through that non-district schedule. So it'll be fun to watch.
Yes. All right. With that, it's about time to wrap up this edition of the Countdown to Two-A-Days series, the Jim Ned Indians. But before we do that, we want to remind you that on August 21st, that's the big day here at Big Country Preps. That's the day we release our annual preseason football preview with previews for all the teams that we cover throughout the Big Country and plus a sprinkling of those outside of the Big Country, along with some six man as well. We'll have stats, we'll have standings, we'll have player features for all the 11-man teams that we cover. We'll have opinion pieces, we'll have videos, we'll have photos. We will have an enormous amount of material, and it's the most comprehensive look at big country football of any media source that you're going to find.
And this year it gets even bigger as we're adding 5 new schools to our coverage area with the additions of Mineral Wells, Glen Rose, Graham, Toller, and Miles. So we're super excited to add those 5 schools to the mix. We hope y'all are excited to follow our coverage of those schools throughout the school year. In the meantime, thank you for joining us for this episode of our Countdown to Two-A-Day series. And make sure you tune back in tomorrow when we talk about the Sweetwater Mustangs here at the BigCountryPreps.com.